Hi, I'm Jackie, and today I'm going to talk to you about vocabulary in context sentence completion from the critical reading part of the SAT. Before I get started with the problem that's on the board, a few tips. One, I recommend either buying or making SAT vocabulary cards, as nothing can replace a good vocabulary. Perhaps you go over a few a night for several months before taking the test. This will definitely help you on all parts of the critical reading. Another tip I have is to have a working knowledge of the most frequently used prefixes, suffixes, and root words. This will definitely help you if you don't know a word and are trying to establish some kind of meaning for it, even if you're not entirely sure what the definition is. And finally, I know you've heard it a million times since kindergarten, but the more reading you can do, the better you're going to do on this section of the test. It's going to help you get more comfortable understanding words in context, and it's going to bring your general score up more than basically anything. It's critical reading is a skill that takes a long time to learn, and so the more reading you can do, the better your outcome is going to be. Let's say though that you still want to learn some tricks and tips about how to eliminate certain answers from the question, and also how to kind of navigate a certain question type. That's where we come in. Let's look at the question on the board. This is a medium difficulty. So this should be right in the middle of the questions you would be looking at on the SAT. When you are reading it for the first time in your head, I would recommend using the word blank mentally when you see the blanks. There might be one or there might be two. And then afterwards, if you can fill in that blank with a word from your own vocabulary, don't write it down, that's a waste of time, but mentally if you can fill it in, do so, and look down to the answers guide and see if there's a word there that is a synonym to the word that you've mentally placed in your head. If you can't do that, no problem. There's other ways that we're going to go about doing this. But first, let's look at the problem. Since establishing the Children's Defense Fund in 1973, Marian Wright Edelman has been an blank advocate, steadfast and constant. Now, in these types of problems where you're learning to look for a definition that's going to define the blank, oftentimes the definition comes after the comma. You'll see this a lot. So the word in the blank is going to mean something like steadfast and constant. We're looking for a word that means that. Even if you don't know both of these words, you might know one and you might notice that it's positive. Connotation can really help you in this. Denotation is the dictionary definition of a word, whereas connotations are all the things we bring up emotionally or associatively when we hear a word. So I like to think that most words either have a positive connotation or a negative connotation. Granted, there are neutral words, but in this case, we see words like steadfast, constant, advocate, and something positive like the Children's Defense Fund. We know it's going to be a word with a positive connotation. Another tip in general, two things. One, don't pay a lot of attention to dates and names on the SAT, just kind of glaze over those, because in general, you are never going to be asked to recall that information. Also, know that the SAT isn't going to outwardly bash a historical figure 99% of the time, especially not one that's been associated with the Children's Defense Fund, which is something positive. So any overly harsh words we can already get rid of. They are not going to say that this historical figure was an awful advocate. So if you're looking at this, let's look at the answer choices. A is unwitting, B is unswerving, C is inhibiting, D is elusive, and E is antagonistic. If you know any of these and you know that they have an outwardly hostile meaning, you can get rid of them immediately. If you see ones that have a negative connotation that you're sure of, you can get rid of those as well. So perhaps at this point you narrowed down your answer choice to 2 or 3 words. You have a smaller pool to work with, and even if that's as far as you can narrow it down on the SAT, it's better to pick out of 1 or to 3 than to have no sense and be working with all 5. Let's start with the word antagonistic. This is where knowing your prefixes comes in handy. Ant is the prefix here, and it means opposing. I'm going to write that down. Now, if something means opposing, it's probably not going to be a positive thing. You can probably make that assumption, but let's just say you're also looking at this, you're like, I've kind of heard the word antagonist before. Where does that sound familiar from? Most likely you've heard it in your literature class in high school when you're talking about stories. There's the protagonist who's the hero of the story and the antagonist who's usually cast as the villain. If you take that kind of term and think of it in this villain, advocate, doesn't really fit together. It's pretty much the opposite. The actual meaning of antagonist, not the connotation but the denotation, it means that someone who is hostile or unfriendly. All we need to know is hostile. Hostile is as negative as it can be, as I've said before. The SAT is not going to use that kind of language about a historical figure. So right away we can cross that one out as one of our answer choices. Let's look at elusive now. Again, if we know prefixes, elusive means a sense of strange or other. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense on its own, but it also doesn't really reassure us that this is going to be the type of word that's going to fit into our answer choice that needs to be overwhelmingly positive. Elusive means difficult to describe or to define, evasive. It's not really the most negative of words, it's kind of neutral depending on the context, but does that mean steadfast and constant? No. If you're unsure, you can kind of keep it as a choice because maybe you're like, this isn't outwardly wrong, but it's not right either. We can keep it, but let's see if we can find a better answer. Now let's look at inhibiting. Again, if we know our prefixes, we can know that in means to have the sense of not, it can mean lacking, and these are all clearly negative things. Again, we have something with a negative connotation. The actual word inhibit means to restrain, to obstruct. If she was the kind of person who was a restraining advocate or an obstructing advocate, does that again define steadfast and constant? No. So this one we can definitely say no. These two, if you'll notice, have the same prefix, so we might feel a little bit confused about that. And this is one that you should definitely know, the prefix on means not. So if we were just going by that, we might say this is negative. But let's look at the roots of each. Witting. Well, the root here is wit. Wit means intelligence or knowingness. So if you have not and then knowing, put those together, it's not a very flattering picture. So we can definitely cross this one out. But what if we apply not to the word swerve? When we talk about the word swerve, it's to go off course. Now literally, if you're on a road, going off course is just doing a quick turn. If you can also apply this metaphorically, if somebody who goes off course, they don't follow a path that's constant. So not swerving, not going off course, staying constant, well that sounds like being steadfast and constant. We pair that against elusive. Let's say we are between those two words, and we know that elusive is hard to define, whereas this is not swerving. We can be pretty sure that our answer is B. Now, if you already knew unswerving and you had mentally put in a word like consistent, you would already be well ahead of everything. So this is just the long way. Here's one more tip. I don't ever want you to take too much time on any one question. If you really have no sense of all of the words, go through it, try to, as quickly as possible, narrow down your question choices and your answer choices, and then go in and cut your loss. Try to make your best educated guess and go on. But these are just in case you can quickly go through these. Hopefully if you know your prefixes, hopefully if you study your vocabulary, you can narrow it down to at least 3, and some of these other tips will help you. For more information, go to www.sandersontestprep.com. The link is in the description below. Thank you.